Hey class, in this video we are going to be covering action and motion, but before we even get into capturing that type of photography, we've got to talk about the shutter speed. Okay, and that's the key element on determining how you're going to capture action and motion photography. So let's get into it right now. In this slide, we have all various shutter speeds that your camera may support. With the fastest shutter speed at 1/8,000th of a second. Your camera may or may not have that shutter speed, and it's okay if you don't have it. Some of your cameras will go up to 1/4000th of a second, or maybe 1/2000th of a second. Okay, so those are your fast, really fast shutter speeds. And on the slower end, we start getting to quarter second, half second, and 1 second, 2 full seconds, up to 30 seconds. So the slowest shutter speed that your camera can be set to that'll automatically start and stop would be 30 seconds. And the fastest one would be dependent upon your camera make and model. And these pictures of these animals are also indicators of the kind of action that you would be capturing if you were to be using a particular shutter speed. So the faster the moving action, you'd want to use a faster shutter speed. If things aren't really moving that fast at all, you don't necessarily need to have a fast shutter speed. Okay. Now, what I just showed you were like the full shutter speed, full stops of shutter speeds, and your camera has a lot more than those shutter speeds. So if you look at this chart, this is similar to what I just showed you in the previous screen. Full stops of shutter speeds. Then some cameras may have it set to half stops, but most of your cameras will have the shutter speeds in what's called third stops. So if you look at here, if we're, let's say you set your shutter speed to 1/125th of a second, all the numbers in green are what's considered full shutter stops. If you wanted to make your shutter go faster from 1/125th to, let's say, one stop faster to 1/250th of a second, when you move your dial, your shutter speed dial, you will encounter a couple numbers in between 1/125th to 1/250th. You'll see 1/160 and 1/200. You can actually try it out right now. Put your shutter speed to 1/125 and make it go faster to 1/250, but on your way there, you're going to see 1/160 and 1/200. These are called incremental stops or third stops. It's just just more accuracy for you to have on your camera in terms of controlling your shutter speed. It's very similar to your depth of field. You had full f-stops, then you had these incremental or third stops in between the f-stops. It's the same concept here. It's just more accuracy for you to create an exposure. Back in the film days, with these analog cameras, you may have only had the full stops. You wouldn't have anything in between. So the accuracy wasn't quite there compared to the digital cameras that we have now. Okay. So also I want you to be aware of how to get to like your seconds. So if you are, let's say you put your shutter speed at 1/125th of a second and you wanted to slow it down 1/60th and 1/30th, and eventually you're going to 1/4, which is a quarter second. And at some point you're going to be at like 1 second or 2 seconds. The way you could tell if you're in the seconds, really slow shutter speed, is you may see a quotation mark on your display. So that is, if you see that, that means you're in a very slow shutter speed. Just to let you know where you are in terms of the spectrum of shutter speeds that your camera has. So be aware of that. Okay. So if you put it on 2 or 3 quotes or 5, you're thinking you're at 1/5 of a second or on 1/4 of a second. but in reality you're like 4 seconds. You press the shutter, and you'll notice that it doesn't have the second click after like 4 seconds. So that's because you're in a 4 second exposure instead of a quarter second exposure. Okay, to make sure you're aware of that. If you slowed your shutter down, you'll see 30 seconds. As I said, it's the slowest shutter you can use on most of your cameras that are out there. And if you keep going further after 30 seconds, you may see something called B, as in bulb. Bulb mode has no time limit. So as long as you press the shutter, you're holding it down, and you're in bulb mode, that shutter curtain is going to stay open for as long as you're holding the shutter down. So there's no time limit on that. So if you're doing a long exposure, such as like star trails, if you've seen some of these shots where it looks like the stars are moving in a circular pattern, those can take longer than 30 seconds. Sometimes it could be several minutes, maybe even an hour or longer. And you would need to put it in a bulb mode if your exposure was going to be longer than 30 seconds. And instead of holding your finger on the shutter for, let's say, 20, 40 minutes or even an hour, you would buy a remote, a wireless remote or a wired remote that would keep your shutter, your curtain open for as long as you want to keep it open, and you press the button again and it would close it. But you'd have to be in what's called bulb mode. So understand, if you end up in B, whether it's accident, go ahead, make sure you get out of B and go back into your faster shutter speeds. Okay, and that's it. On the next video, we're going to talk about the different types of action photography and how we use our shutter speeds to create these action and motion shots.